Hey everyone, welcome back to Mythology Explained. Just the other day, I got a chance to see Hokum in theatres, a new horror release with some rave reviews that honestly scared the out of me. I went in completely blind, no trailer, having only seen scores on Rotten Tomatoes and imdb, and I've got to say, it was pretty decent. And as far as being effective as a scary horror movie, no complaints there either. And although I enjoyed it, I found myself on multiple occasions looking past the scares themselves and focusing on the folklore and symbolism the film was pulling from. Having a mythology channel, I couldn't help but think about the Irish mythology and folklore that inspired it. The rabbits, the hallucinations, the strange sense of crossing into another reality, the witch, the idea of being watched by the environment itself. It all feels rooted in much older Celtic ideas about the supernatural and the otherworld. And the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I realized that a lot of what makes the movie feel so unnerving probably comes from the fact that it's drawing on fears and symbols that have existed in folklore for centuries. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't name all of the folklore and mythology the film was drawing inspiration from off the top of my head, but I've since gone in and researched things more closely. Which is why today I want to break down some of the mythology hiding underneath Hokum and explain the real folklore inspirations behind some of the film's strangest and creepiest elements. This is also the first video in a series I'd like to do that unpacks folklore and mythology from blockbuster films, so let me know if you enjoyed it. Now, a lot of modern horror films try to scare audiences through gore, jump scares, or overly explained supernatural lore. Hokum sort of does the opposite. Much like older folktales, it presents strange things without fully explaining them, creating the sense that the characters have wandered into something ancient and fundamentally unknowable. Of course, we later find out that Ohm, the main character played by Adam Scott, has been drinking whiskey that's been spiked with magic mushrooms, but we don't find that out until the end. So who knows what Ohm actually saw and what was just his mind playing tricks on him. And this all plays back to some of the film's central themes. Underneath all of the horror, Hokum is really a story about guilt, shame, and trauma. Damien McCarthy himself described the movie as a deeply personal, psychological story hiding underneath a layer of folklore and supernatural symbolism. And a really interesting layer of Irish folklore hidden inside Hokum comes through the way the film combines sound, animal imagery, and folkloric figures to create this constant sense that the characters are drifting into something ancient and supernatural. When discussing the mythical inspiration behind the movie, director Damien McCarthy specifically mentioned being inspired by the banshee, even explaining that a fox scream was used as part of the sound design to mimic a witch's cry. The banshee in Irish folklore is one of the most famous supernatural entities in Celtic mythology. Traditionally, the banshee is a female spirit associated with death, mourning, and supernatural warning. According to Irish legend, hearing the cry or wail of a banshee was considered an omen that someone nearby was about to die. In many stories, the scream itself is described as horrifying, not simply because it sounds unnatural, but because it carries this overwhelming sense of inevitability. The cry announces that something terrible is already approaching. And these stories are old, extremely old. The origins of the banshee stretch back over 1,000 years into early Gaelic Ireland, with many historians tracing the legends all the way back to pre-Christian Celtic traditions. The term banshee literally means woman of the fairy mound or woman of the otherworld, referring to the she, supernatural fairy dwellings believed to exist beneath ancient hills and burial mounds scattered throughout Ireland. In ancient Celtic belief, these mounds were not just landmarks, they were thought to be entrances into another realm entirely, a supernatural world inhabited by spirits and otherworldly beings. Over time, the banshee became deeply woven into Irish oral tradition, especially among old Gaelic families. Certain bloodlines were even believed to have their own personal banshee that would appear or cry shortly before a family member's death. And unlike many modern horror creatures, the banshee wasn't traditionally viewed as some evil monster hunting people down. She was more like a supernatural messenger, a spirit tied to fate and mortality itself. What makes the mythology even more fascinating is that the banshee was often described as a shapeshifter. Depending on the story, she could appear as a young, beautiful woman dressed in white, a pale old crone, or even a terrifying corpse-like figure with sunken eyes and long hair. In some legends, she appears washing blood-stained clothes beside rivers, while in others, she manifests only as a voice echoing through the countryside. And because Celtic folklore constantly blurred the line between spirits, witches, and fairy beings, the banshee often occupied this strange middle ground between ghost and supernatural entity. That ability to shift forms and remain partially unseen makes the comparison to Hokum especially interesting. Throughout the film, the horror never fully settles into one clear shape. Sounds drift through the darkness, figures appear and disappear, and the audience is left constantly questioning what is real and what is supernatural. The fear comes less from seeing a monster directly, and more from sensing that something ancient is lurking nearby, just beyond perception. Throughout the film, sound is constantly used to destabilize both the audience and the characters long before anything fully reveals itself visually. There are screams, distorted cries, and unsettling noises drifting through the hotel and surrounding environment, almost like supernatural warnings. The choice to use fox screams is especially clever because fox vocalizations are genuinely terrifying in real life. They can sound disturbingly human, especially at night, which is one reason foxes became associated with supernatural folklore in various traditions. Before modern understanding of animal behavior, hearing those kinds of screams echo through isolated countryside would have been horrifying. Because of this, ancient communities would often interpret them as witches, spirits, or supernatural entities lurking in the darkness. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons the sound design in Hokum works so well. It taps into an ancient human fear that predates modern horror entirely, hearing something unnatural in darkness and realizing you may not be alone. One of the scariest moments in the film is when we're introduced to Jack the donkey. Interestingly, from a lot of the comments online, it seems like many people thought Jack is somehow connected to the rabbit imagery spread throughout the movie. And honestly, I can understand why people make that connection. The film repeatedly surrounds the audience with rabbit symbolism through Florence O'Driscoll's Halloween costume and the various rabbit ornaments scattered throughout the hotel. So by the time Jack the donkey fully emerges, we're already psychologically primed to associate the horror with animalistic folkloric imagery. But interestingly, Damien McCarthy has actually said the donkey-headed figure wasn't directly based on any specific piece of Irish folklore. It was largely his own creation, inspired partly by the eerie atmosphere of old children's television from the 1940s and 1950s. But either way, the movie's use of rabbit symbolism works well alongside Jack the Donkey, even though they are technically separate ideas. As in Celtic folklore, hares and rabbits were often associated with witchcraft, shapeshifting, and the Otherworld. In some Irish traditions, witches were believed to transform into hares at night, while supernatural entities like the puka could appear in animal forms, including rabbits or hares. The rabbits quietly create psychological unease, while Jack the Donkey becomes the terrifying folkloric manifestation emerging from that atmosphere. I think that this combination is part of what makes Hokum feel so unnerving compared to more straightforward horror films. It builds a world that feels contaminated by ancient folklore. The sounds, the animals, the hallucinations, the strange cries in the darkness, they all combine to create the feeling that the characters have wandered into a place where older mythological rules have started to replace ordinary reality itself. Even the chalk circles shown later in the film draw directly from old folklore and occult traditions. Across European witchcraft mythology, circles made from chalk or salt were often believed to create protected sacred spaces that evil spirits or supernatural entities couldn't cross. In Hokum, those circles are not only practical protection against the witch, but symbolic representations of emotional isolation. At the end of the day, if you're an Irish folklore scholar, then you're going to recognize some immediate holes in Hokum. But if you're a casual moviegoer who appreciates a bit of mythology, it works just fine. The movie isn't trying to adapt one singular legend exactly as it existed historically. Damien McCarthy himself has openly said that many elements of the film were largely his own creations, simply inspired by folklore rather than pulled directly from any one specific myth. But even though Hokum takes creative liberties, it still captures something much more important: the feeling of old Celtic folklore. The uncertainty, the dread, the blurred line between reality and the supernatural, the idea that nature itself may be hiding ancient forces just beyond human understanding. All of that feels deeply authentic to Irish folk horror traditions. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you haven't seen the movie already, be sure to go and check it out. See you in the next one.